What is up, my friends, and welcome into the All Nittany Lion podcast here on PHLY as we broadcast live from the Xfinity mobile studios. And as always, we are brought to you by our friends over at Branded Bills. Use that promo code up in the corner, BBPHLY at brandedbills.com to get 15% off your first order. I got my Branded Bills hat in today. It's looking sleek. You know, I went with the trucker hat style, but a little bit more fitted in the back. I'm feeling pretty good about it. Tyler Zulli and Fran Duffy here, as always. And first and foremost, Fran, another football weekend in the books. A happy week to you, or a week 4, I guess I should say now, maybe, depending on how you feel about week 0. But regardless, another week here for college and pro football. Hope you're doing well, my friend.
Yeah, it was a great week. A lot of great games, both in the college slate and in the NFL slate. So it was good to be able to get. I feel like we're getting into a rhythm now, and it feels like Penn State, hopefully, getting into a rhythm. We'll talk about that on both sides of the ball. But no, it was a great weekend. Good food, good ball. It was definitely a good one.
A couple of former Big Ten quarterbacks in Monday Night Football. It was not the greatest of games, I will say, but I think there's some sparks from Michael Penix at times. J.J. McCarthy, I know he's injured and may miss some time. We might see Carson Wentz for the Vikings. Yep. But I before we even get into things with that game specifically with J.J. McCarthy, there's almost this conversation of like, it's kind of the Jalen Hurts conversation a little bit, but Jalen Hurts has done it at the highest NFL level, where J.J. McCarthy maybe statistically doesn't stand out to you, but all he does is win football games. Maybe starting to catch up to him a little bit at the NFL level through the first couple of games. I know it's only 2 games into his career, basically, but.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is that this is a guy that didn't play a ton in college, right? And in terms of like overall like throws, and who's like a 1.5-year starter for the Wolverines, obviously leads them to the national title, but then misses his entire rookie year. So it's still very, very early. Obviously, the injury does not help matters, but no, I'm excited to see what he looks like once he's back in the lineup fully healthy.
All right, so let's jump right into this weekend's game. This, to me, felt a little bit more like the route that we were expecting. Now, I know that 34-0 last week against FIU numerically feels good, and we talked a lot about a shutout. And Penn State was, about 6 seconds away, and a tiptoe catch, and a really nice one at that. A really nice play to end the game from hosting a second shutout, a 52-0 shutout, but instead 52-6. For those that like to dabble in the financial side of sports, I know the hook caught you pretty bad on that one. But this one felt a little bit more like the butt kicking, if you will, that we were expecting from a non-conference game from Penn State.
Yeah, or maybe you were really thrilled with what was one of the craziest backdoor covers I've seen in a long, long time. But no, I think that I agree with you. Look, Penn State dominated this one from start to finish. I do think it's interesting, and we can talk through this a little bit. I thought we saw the starters on offense, most of the starters on offense for most of the game. Defensively, they were rotating those backups in very, very early. Now, you still saw it's third quarter, and you see some, Denai Dennis Sutton, and you see some Zane Durant. You saw those guys mixed in, but it was like second quarter, and you saw, some of a lot of the young players getting quality reps early on in this game. And I think that's kind of speaks to what we've seen from both sides of the ball. We've talked about how this is kind of a feeling out period for Drew Aller with these new receivers, with a little bit of a new look on the offensive side, continuing to kind of feel things out there. So I wasn't completely unexpected, but definitely interesting to note here in week 3.
So with the offense specifically, 465 total yards. They averaged almost 7.5 yards per play, which is nearly 1.5 yards more than what they averaged last week against FIU. It felt like a more efficient game. I do think there are still some offensive things to be cleaned up, as you bring up with Drew Aller. We'll go through some of the really good. I thought the throw that he made to Trevor Pena right as time was expiring in the first half may have been his best throw all year, the NFL type of throw. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. But I wrote some good and some bad, and I'm interested in your thoughts on some of these points. The 7-play, 70-yard drive to end the half, right before that throw to Pena,
right,
in 36 seconds. I thought that one was the kind of emblematic Penn State, Andy Kotelnicki type of offense where they can go up tempo, they can get down the field very quickly, they can move the football quickly and with efficiency, both on the ground and through the air. That drive stood out to me of all of the drives that they put together in this game as the one that was like, when Penn State is moving offensively, that's the type of drive that they can do and kind of flip a switch very, very quickly and get down the field in the blink of an eye. Because A, they like to go quick tempo with that type of drive. B, they move the ball effectively both on the ground with Singleton and K-Tron and through the air with this new receiving core. That one really stood out to me as maybe the best drive of the game with the ease and the time in which they did it.
And it was that I felt that drive was very, is exemplary of like why this Penn State offense can be very dangerous because they can beat you in a lot of different ways. And you mentioned there, it's like, all right, you've got the run game and there's different layers to the run game. What K-Tron Allen brings is different, than what Singleton brings. You have Aller and what he can do with his legs. There's elements there with the run game. But then when you get to the pass game, it's like, all right, you have everything that Andy Kotelnicki can bring from a schematic, like, the misdirection, the crazy formations, and the Wildcat, and like all the different aspects that he brings from a schematic X's and O's. And then it's, all right, well, Trevor Pena in space and running speed outs off motion. And then you've got Devontae Ross and what he can do as a vertical threat. And you have Hudson and what he can be outside the numbers. And like all of these different things are ways that you can beat an offense. And then, by the way, Drew Aller can make any throw. So you have all these different ways that you can attack an opponent. And I thought that was kind of put on display in that first half and notably on that final drive.
The other thing of note, 3 drives to end the game with touchdowns really kind of runs the score up. All of a sudden it goes from a 30-something game to a 52 spot. But the last thing I thought of good so far this year, Penn State has been opportunistic within the red zone. They've scored 16 of 17 times in the red zone. That's good for 94%. It's tied for 33rd because it's early in the season and a lot of teams are being efficient. That was the good, is they've scored on 16 of 17 drives. Now, inversely, maybe it's the not so good when it comes to scoring within the red zone. 6 of those 16 scores so far have been field goals. And when you think about some of the drives, especially over the last 2 weeks, that they've settled for field goals where they've been put in really good field position, that's where maybe it starts to be a little bit maybe problematic, right? A 4-play, 4-yard drive that started on Nova's 32. They settle for 3. A 7-play, 23-yard drive that started on Nova's 48. They settle for 3. So these long extended drives where they go 7 for 70, or the opening drive where they went 12 plays, 78 yards, those are peak of the way that this offense can operate. But I think maybe the things that need to be cleaned up is they've had a couple of short yardage situations in which a good punt return or a good defensive stand or a turnover have put them in good spots, especially plus spots on the field the last couple of weeks. And there's been 3 or 4 times in the last 2 weeks or so that they've settled for field goals as opposed to punching in a touchdown. And that works against Nevada. It works against FIU. It works against Nova. Probably not going to work in Big Ten play.
No question. And so when I look at, the offense a year ago, and obviously the run game was a big part of it, but Tyler Warren and his like sheer force of will, all the different ways that they would use him in the red area, I think really benefited that offense, whether it was as a runner or as a pass catcher. And so I think trying to find different ways to be able to attack when the field shrinks down, is there one of these receivers that can step up? Will one of these tight ends step up? And we'll talk about that a little bit. Obviously Dinkins, he's had his moments. I think that some of the other young players, some of these other young guys at the position also have had their moments as well. But that is certainly an area when you get to, as you mentioned, you go to Oregon, you play some of these other Big Ten teams, that are on the schedule. You can't just settle for 3, constantly. And so I do think that that's probably an area when they get it. That's what the bye week's about, is schematically the self-scouting stuff. All right, are there different levers that we can pull here in this part of the field, this part of situational football that will benefit us here in the second half of the season?
Well, and I think it maybe plays naturally into the next point that I wanted to bring up in the potentially not so good. And I think, you bring up those tight ends and how Tyler Warren was that safety blanket in the red zone. I think the same could be said for third down conversions as well. They're at 39% through the first 3 games of the season. Last year, a significant uptick compared to this year. 39% obviously is not dreadful, but I think that against these 3 opponents, you would like to have it be a little bit more. 5 for 11 in Saturday's game against Villanova, so that helped a little bit. But I think kind of naturally with that conversation about the red zone and how you figure out replacing Tyler Warren, do you feel the same could be said for the third down conversion opportunities, even in short yardage situations where Tyler Warren was an excellent blocker downfield as well?
Yeah, no question. I actually would be interested to see too what those numbers are, like first half, second half splits when it comes to third down. Only because sometimes you get into the second half of these blowouts and it's third and short, it's 3rd and 5, and it's like, all right, the defense knows you're just trying to sit on the ball, and so you get into run defense mode there. But I do think that ultimately, this is a team, this is an offense where situationally they were so good a year ago. And you don't want to lose that, because especially in those high leverage games, those high leverage moments where you don't know, like, is this going to be one of the 4 or 5 plays that is going to tilt the outcome of this game? You want to make sure that you are really, really sound when it comes to situational football, third down and in the red zone. Guys like Tyler Warren, they are math changers in that way. And so if you don't have that player right now that's ascended into that role, then you need everybody to kind of pick up the pieces and kind of replace it in the aggregate, which is something we've talked about for the last 3 weeks in the show.
So we'll get into that a little bit more, because I know you've done some film study on both the tight ends, but I think Luke Reynolds is starting to ascend a little bit. And I know we'll talk a little bit more about him later in the show. The last thing I wanted to get into in this first segment as we finish wrapping up kind of this Nova game and we turn our attention to Big Ten play. There was a throw that Drew Aller made, and it was on that 7-play, 70-yard drive right at the end of the half. It was the touchdown throw to Pena. Obviously, the result is the ultimate result, but more so than that is I watched that throw and I saw an NFL quarterback. And I not only saw an NFL quarterback, I almost felt like there were some NFL quarterbacks who are currently starters in the NFL who may not make that throw on a routine basis. It was a strike down the middle of the field, got over top of the linebacker, was able to beat the safety. It was well placed. Pena didn't have to adjust. He hit him in stride. I texted you as soon as he made that throw, Fran, and I said, that's the best throw that Drew Aller has made so far in this young season. And that was the throw, if he can routinely make, that I think cements him as a potential first-round pick in next year's draft.
Yeah, he striped that one. That was a hell of a throw. And honestly, he had a few in this game that were some impressive darts. Like, look, the interception in the second half was a bad pick, right?
Sure.
It was late. It was off target. It was kind of not no look, but that was a bad pick. And he should know better than to make that interception. That said, like I remember I was actually texted a friend as I was going through the film. And I was like, this is the best that he has looked up to this point this year. And obviously it's small sample, competition, all that context aside, I feel like this is the best that Aller has looked up until that interception. I think you look at that throw, certainly the touchdown to Pena. You look at the deep post that he threw to Ross over the top. I mean, that thing traveled like 60+ yards in the air, and it was a spot where Ross could go and get it. Outstanding throw, and it was an effortless throw. It was a big time pass in that situation. He threw one Hudson, a deep outbreaking route from the opposite hash, where he double clutched it a little bit. I do think the timing between him and Hudson is not quite there with where it is with Pena and with Ross. I think there are still some times where I don't know if it's like he's still getting used to his strides and how he runs certain routes. Not quite there. You see him double clutch more often when he's looking at Hudson as opposed to Pena and Ross, even though Ross missed the latter stages of camp and the early stage of the season with that injury. But I like the fact that with all three receivers, you saw him make some high reaching throws in this game against Villanova, and even to Dinkins too, to Khalil Dinkins. He put that one ball at a dot that Dinkins couldn't complete the catch along the sideline. He tried to get his feet in bounds, couldn't complete. But man, like that was a nice, like easy, just kind of snap it off throw to the sideline. And so I do think we saw some good things from Aller in this game, that interception notwithstanding.
So let me ask you this: when you're watching the tape, is that more to you a player connection thing? Is that a levels thing? Like, you've talked about one of these guys is the short route. One of these guys takes the intermediate route. One of these guys takes the top off the defense. Is that a levels thing where maybe a second level throw is where he can maybe finesse his game and finesse his throws a little bit more? Is it a player-to-player connection? When you're watching the tape, like what exactly are you looking for to how does that improve?
I think that, and when I spoke about that last week, and I still feel strongly about that, and honestly, it showed up in this game. It was like the archetype of all these receivers and where their best usage. Obviously, you want to be able to use all three of them in all areas because you don't want to be too predictive or too predictable. If you are a corner lined up against Pena, you're like, all right, like these are the routes he's definitely going to run. I do think though that there's an element to the archetype of receiver, if you are a Hudson, right, where you're going to change up your route pacing, right? You're going to win at the intermediate area. You're not a blazer like Ross, or even Pena is like a speed guy too, where he is just like all gas, no brakes. He's going full speed all the time. That's a little bit easier as a quarterback where it's like, all right, like I know, like, you're able to kind of gauge that speed, over the course of the route. Whereas when you have a guy like Hudson, the timing and rhythm, that becomes more of a feel thing. And I remember reading about this with like Aaron Rodgers and Devontae Adams, because that's how Adams was. Devontae Adams, when he came out of Fresno State, he was not like a 4.3 speed guy, right? And he's not a 4.6 guy either. He's a guy he's going to mess with his tempo. He's going to mess with DBs in terms of like, all right, I'm going to accelerate and decelerate. And, depending on the route and depending on the leverage and depending on the situation, I might throw a little bit more extra sauce at the top of this route to really kind of shake you off. And so you can kind of see like there was a little bit of hesitancy with Drew Aller on that one route. But that's what the first three games have been all about for him in my mind is, all right, I've got to get used to making sure that I can pull the trigger on all of these kinds of throws with these three new targets. And I think we've seen that. And I think it was important to see it in this game in particular because we're in the Big Ten schedule time now. And so it's obviously it starts with Oregon in a couple of weeks, but I do think that was important to see here in these last couple of games.
All right, last thing before we kind of close the book on the non-conference schedule and this game against Villanova. I numerically for Villanova, didn't get a whole lot going offensively. Tanner Maddox ended up being the leading passer in the game because of that last drive. He was 6 of 12 for 69 yards. 53 yards is their leading rusher, 41 yards their leading receiver. So obviously it was not a statistically abundant game for the Villanova offense in general. So anything defensively from Penn State that stood out to you outside of the fact that numerically they shut down a team that they probably should?
Yeah, I would say, I mentioned earlier, like the rotation started early. And so you got to see a lot of young guys get rotated in, late first quarter, early second quarter, which was good to see. But then I think also too, I think there's an identity forming with this group. And I think that when you look at, all right, like they lost some players at all three levels. What were they going to look like? This secondary is very like aggressive, and they're playing with like a swagger that I think is really is going to help them as they get into Big Ten play. I like what I've seen from Zaki Whitley, but even the young corner whose name is who's leaving me right now, number 2, really stood out to me as well. Aldavian Collins. I enjoy watching this kid play, like just really competitive in coverage. And they played a lot of press man in this game. So you saw that like a competitiveness and that aggressiveness really stand out. I thought that was one of my big takeaways from watching the film this week as well.
All right, so we closed the book on non-conference play. We'll talk more about what Big Ten play holds, obviously, through the next 2 weeks. But coming up, we're going to ask the question, and we'll ask it this week, and we'll probably pose it again next week because it's a huge test on September 27th, excuse me. Is Penn State ready for Big Ten play? And especially is Penn State ready for the beginning of Big Ten play when you get thrown to the wolves and have to go face an Oregon team that is firing offensively on all cylinders and have scored a ton of points. We'll also get into our top 5. And unlike last week, Fran, I think our top 5s vary a little bit. Last week, we were pretty much in lockstep with the exception of 1 or 2. This week, I vaulted a team into the top 5 that has not appeared on either of our lists. And I know that I've talked about their quarterback in the past, and I haven't given him rave reviews, but I vaulted a team into the top 5 for the first time this year. And I have to give the kid credit where credit is due. We'll do that on the other side as well. It is the All Nittany Lion podcast. We are brought to you by our friends over at Branded Bills. We are broadcasting live from the Xfinity mobile studios. On the other side, we'll get into is Penn State ready for Big Ten play? It's the All Nittany Lion podcast. We'll be right back after this. All right, let me tell you about our friends over at Branded Bills while we're here, because I got my new sleek, stylish Branded Bills hat. I got the little rope going on here. I think it looks pretty sweet, right? I got my Penn State logo, but you can flip it around. I like this new style of hat, right? The trucker style, but it feels pretty good. It's comfortable. It's sleek. It's stylish. you got the snapback, but it feels a little more fitted on your head. That's why I feel comfortable showing you all angles of it, even though my hairline's looking pretty rough these days. But if you're looking for a snapback, a trucker hat, a fitted hat, beanies, or t-shirts, Branded Bills has you covered with performance and style. If you're looking for gear that makes your brand stand out, especially if you want to rock your Nittany Lions gear at Beaver Stadium in 2 weeks when it's the whiteout against Oregon, you have to do it with our friends over at Branded Bills. Start your order, and their dedicated team will help you create the exact custom apparel that you need. They have a partnership with Penn State and a ton of other colleges. If you want to wear some other gear as well, their gear is awesome. Head on over to brandedbills.com, use the code BBPHLY, and you'll get 15% off of your first order, including hats that look just like this. Thanks to our friends over at Branded Bills.
We'll now hear from our friends over at Xfinity because, look, we've all been there. The other day, I'm over at a friend's place, and he's pumped to watch football. We've got a big weekend, but his setup is a complete and total mess. You got lagging, you got buffering and switching between apps, trying to find the game on any number of streamers. He claimed that he was a big fan, but I feel like I've been fan-fished because if you call yourself a big football fan, then you've got to have Xfinity. There's no better answer. It is the ultimate sports destination. You can find the best games, your favorite teams, all in one spot, and the way you watch is next level. It's the perfect fan flex. You got all the action right in your living room. Plus, Xfinity's got best picture and sound with enhanced 4K. So clear, it feels like you're right there in the stadium. Sometimes I've got 4 games going all at once because why not? And on top of that, you've got the real-time notifications. You've got live stats right there on your TV. It is the best seat in the house every single time. So next game day, make sure that big fan is not a big fail. Learn more on Xfinity.com. Xfinity, imagine that. Restrictions apply. Multi-view requires Xfinity 4K capable TV box.
All right, welcome back to the All Nittany Lion podcast here on PHLY. Tyler Zulli, Fran Duffy, as we get you set for Big Ten play. Not quite yet for Penn State, but some teams have started Big Ten play. In fact, Penn State's next opponent, Oregon, had a Big Ten game this past week. They win 34-14 at Northwestern. Fran, I don't know if you caught any of that game or saw any of the highlights. It feels weird to me, and I'm not saying that it's some historic stadium in terms of success, but not having a game at Ryan Field at Northwestern is still kind of strange. I know they're renovating and they've got the temp seats and everything going on. I remember walking into Ryan Field probably almost a decade ago now and feeling like this is getting old, but the pillars in the corners with it feels like it's got the tower and everything was very, very cool. And I think we're starting to lose some history and some individuality to some of these college football stadiums as they renovate, and understandably so. You get more seats, you get better view lines, all of it. I get it. Not every team needs to play at Fenway Park and Wrigley Field, but I do almost miss I don't want to call it like a dump because that's not fair, but I do miss the old school feel of this is football in its almost just grittiest form.
Yeah, I mean, we have something like that local here in Philly, and it's not to this level. I would not compare Ryan Field to the Palestra, but it's the idea of all right, the romanticization of of college sports and for the love of the game, that kind of thing. But I watched the Oregon defense against the Northwestern offense on film. Did not watch the game live. My big takeaway was Oregon's good. Oregon's a good team. And so that'll be a really fun matchup for us to break down next week. I do think that the Ducks are one of the best teams in the country right now, both sides of the ball. But again, we'll dive into that from a personnel standpoint as we get into next week.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. I don't think that it's over exaggeration to say they're one of the best teams in college football right now. I think there's a lot of good teams, and I think there's some teams that maybe have been a little bit overrated compared to what we expected them to be. I'm not sure how many great teams at the very moment that there are. I think maybe there's 2, and it may right now just be Ohio State and Oregon, and we'll find out maybe who else fits that bill as we go on. But we've seen some teams, right? Notre Dame has started the year 0-2. Now it's against 2 ranked opponents, but they're 0-2 nonetheless. We've seen Clemson. And I know that, you texted me the other day and said, feel good about my evaluation about Cade Klubnik. And I think you should, because we talked about them at the beginning of the season, understanding they were going to be a defensive-minded team, but they're just not putting up enough points. They lose to Georgia Tech. I know Haynes King he's a dog. He just fights, and you got to give him a ton of credit. But they lose to Georgia Tech for their second straight loss or second loss in 3 games. And maybe some of these teams that we expected to be legitimate teams are not quite as good as we thought they were.
Yeah, honestly, like the start to this college football season has been extremely entertaining because I love the fact that it's not what we expected from some of these top teams. Now, while Klubnik has not played well for Clemson, I do think that even that Clemson defense, like we haven't seen TJ Parker, who a lot of people have projected as like a top 10 potential pick. Like even like Peter Woods has been, relatively quiet. So I do think when you look at this Clemson defense, they're hoping for a little bit more from that front moving forward. We'll see if they're able to get that. One of my big takeaways, though, man, Garrett Nussmeier has been. We saw that he had that one brutal interception this past week against Florida, like throwing late across his body. I was hoping that we were kind of over that from last year. He had a couple of those late in the season, but that defense, Blake Baker is awesome. The defensive coordinator for LSU, and the way that he is leveraging that talent. We can get into that when we get into the top fives, but that team, if that defense is going to play that way, that gives me like a lot of hope of what that squad could look like as we get down the stretch as well. And, what they could do, what kind of noise they could make come playoff time.
So last question about college football in general, and then we'll get back to the Penn State conversation. Thinking about the one-loss teams or maybe even multiple loss teams, but primarily the one-loss teams. To me, I still think of the one-loss teams, Texas is probably poised to be the best of that group. But do you feel the same way, or is there anybody else that kind of, because one loss isn't dooming anymore like it used to be. One loss and you were pretty much cooked. Now you can lose once, sometimes twice, and still make the college football playoff, especially if you're losing to good teams like a loss to Ohio State. I still think that at the end of the day, Texas at 2-1 is probably better than the loss to Ohio State indicated.
And it's funny because a lot of people a year ago, 12 months ago, would have said like, oh, yeah, like one loss, it's not terrible, but you want that one loss to come early in the season. If it's late in the year, like you're not going to be able to recover. And then we saw Ohio State lose the game, game you cannot lose, especially in that town. And the sky is falling. And then they go on a run and they win the whole thing, right? So I think that, one loss is definitely not the death knell that it was in yesteryear in college football. I do think even two losses, like, teams I think you could still sneak in as long as you get the right wins against the right teams on the schedule. But I would say Texas is definitely in there. You're hoping that Arch can kind of turn a corner. Is he 100% healthy? All that stuff. I mean, we'll see what that team looks like as they get into their SEC slate. But I do think that Texas would be on that list. Is Notre Dame completely done? Like I don't know. It's been two tough losses against two pretty good teams, so they're another team certainly to keep an eye on.
Well, I think with Notre Dame specifically, you look at the schedule and then you go, okay, there's a very realistic chance they could be 10-2 at the end of the season and right back in this conversation again. So obviously, we'll see how it plays out as the year goes on. Let's get back to Penn State. And I asked the question before the break, are the Nittany Lions ready for Big Ten play? And maybe if they were going up against the Nebraska or a UCLA who just fired Deshaun Foster after an 0-3 start, whatever the case may be, I'd feel a little bit more comfortable of padding the blow of heading into Big Ten play. But you're jumping right into it feet first with Oregon coming up. Penn State has outscored their opponents 132-17 in the first three games. But if you think about power rankings, Nevada this week ranked 120th, FIU 112th, obviously Villanova an FCS school. So when you consider they're now going to jump to the number 6 team in the country, I think that if Penn State were to win this game, and we'll break it down more X's and O's next week, but if just big picture, if they were to win this game next week, I think because of what we've seen, it's going to have to come on the strength of their defense, which obviously statistically has been really good because they've played some lesser talent. But they're in the top 20 or better in points per game, tackles for loss, red zone defense, total defense, turnovers gained, turnover margin. You get the point. It's a lot of statistical categories. And I think at this point in this juncture of the season, the best way to win this game may be to keep it into like just a drag down, bare knuckle brawl type of game where you can keep the score low.
Yeah, I mean, the last time Jim Knowles saw this Oregon offense, like he beat the brakes off them, right? So you hope that he's able to bring some of that. Now, that Ohio State defense from a talent standpoint, I'm sure he would have loved to bring some of those Buckeyes over with them. But I think that still, like what we've seen from this Penn State defense can certainly give you a lot of excitement moving forward. This was not the biggest denied Dennis Sutton game. Like we didn't have the same splash plays that we saw against Nevada and against FIU. He did force an interception with a quarterback hit. For Elliott Washington. I think when you're looking at Zane Durant, he can be that disruptive 3 technique. Chaz Coleman had a couple of nice reps, the true freshman edge rusher. I do think that the future is certainly bright for that kid. And I talked about what that secondary looks like. So I think when you've got this defensive line with an aggressive secondary that can be opportunistic, that's a good recipe there for Knowles. Now, this Oregon offense is just, Dante Moore has been outstanding. The run game and everybody's getting involved and all the blocking has been exceptional all across the field. So, for me, I think when you're looking at that matchup, we're going to dive into it a little bit more in depth next week. But I think when you look at this, you probably say you feel better about the defense as you get into the Big Ten slate than you do about the offense. But as we hit at the very top, like this is an offense where if everything clicks, like they can beat you in a lot of different ways. They've really kind of carved it out where, whether it's scheme, X's and O's, run game, pass game, like that, they've got a lot of answers.
So I know it's kind of a blunt question and it's just kind of right on the nose, but I asked the question, is Penn State ready for Big Ten play? And my answer, Fran, is kinda. And I know that that's kind of sitting on the fence and maybe not a definitive answer, but that's kind of where I'm feeling is like, I would say kinda, and if this game was 3 weeks from now instead of the next game, or 3 games from now instead of the next game, and you could get after maybe a Nebraska or a Northwestern or a Rutgers or something like that, where you can kind of just get into Big Ten play and solidify that before you get to this game, I'd feel a lot better. But I do think good teams win these types of games, or good teams make these types of games competitive. And these two are expected to be 2 of the better teams in college football. And so I feel kind of like they're ready to compete at the Big Ten level. I'm curious your thoughts.
My answer is like, they better be. They don't really have a choice in this matter. I think at the end of the day, what's interesting, kind of thinking about the slate that they've had in the first 3 weeks, typically it's like a ramp up. It's like, you start with a smaller level and you move up. It's been more of like, all right, like to me, like Nevada was the best team that they have seen so far, and then FIU, and then Villanova, and now you're going exponentially the other way by seeing Oregon in a couple of weeks. So, I think that look, you take the week, you self-scout, you look back on these first 3 games, you're not playing as many players defensively as you played the first 3 weeks, right? Like we saw like literally like 20 plus guys see the field every single game so far. Unlikely that that's going to be the case. And if it is, honestly, if you say like, all right, if 25 guys play for Penn State defense next week, it's probably not a good outcome for Penn State, right? It's a game that is tilted the other way, would be my guess. So I think at the end of the day, you take this week here in terms of prep, and you look back and say, all right, like what is it that worked well? What is our identity? What is going to be our bread and butter on both sides? And now you get yourself ready. I mean, they don't, as you said, they don't have Northwestern. You don't have Purdue to get yourself ready for this game. You're jumping in head first into this matchup.
Yeah, and I think, like you said, if 25 guys are playing, it's probably an offensive onslaught for Oregon. But I also think in the same breath, if a lot of the guys that played the past 3 weeks, you may end up seeing them be redshirted at the end of the season, right? This may have been their final week of play for the 2025 season, especially younger guys, freshmen and things like that, and get the extra year of eligibility. So I think that the rotation will be shrunk, as you mentioned. It kind of feels like almost playoff basketball, where in the regular season, you're probably playing 12-ish guys. In the postseason, you're probably playing 8 or 9 guys, right, in the NBA style. But I do feel like, you played 25 guys or so last week defensively. You probably get that number down to 17 or 16 or 17, right? Rotate the defensive line, rotate a couple linebackers. But I would imagine the corners, the safeties, deny Dennis Sutton, will play a majority of the snaps beginning next week. And that's going to be the case moving forward. He and Zane Durant probably get a bulk of the snaps defensive line, and you'll cycle in a bunch of different guys. But your back end, your back four probably are going to play most of the snaps moving forward.
No question. And that's why, and that's why it's like you've got the bye week in there as well. And it's like, all right, like let's get your bodies right, get your minds right, and get ready for what is going to be a marathon here down the stretch. And we'll get into it week by week. But this was that's what these first 3 weeks were about. You almost have to approach it from an NFL style in terms of preseason. They took care of business. They beat the teams they were supposed to beat. Style points, not necessarily the most important thing in the world, as long as you take care of business. And that's exactly what Penn State did. But now they have to prove it. All these other teams that we're talking about in terms of like when we do our top fives later in the show, like they've all had matchups against quality opponents that Penn State has not had that yet. So this is your first crack at that with the Ducks next week.
So before we hit the next break, speaking of, lack of quality opponents, or maybe quality opponents in the sense of playing better teams, but these two coaches, Deshaun Foster, UCLA, Brent Pry, former Penn State assistant at Virginia Tech, both fired after just 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Obviously, Virginia Tech, it was funny. I remember watching that Virginia Tech South Carolina game the first week of the year and, being fairly impressed with Virginia Tech's defense. I thought they did a nice job with Lenora Sellers, keeping him contained for a majority of the game. But things have gotten worse and worse for Virginia Tech. They lose to Old Dominion, lose to Ricky Ronnie, another former Penn State assistant, this past week, which was kind of the final nail in the coffin for Brent Pry at Virginia Tech. Deshaun Foster had a really rough start, and I think there was a lot of promise last year. It was a young group. They had a lot of hope heading into the future. This year, they start 0-3, including basically a pay-for-play loss to New Mexico. At home, and you see the stands at the Rose Bowl. It's sparse, to say the least. I know that those two may be like outliers in terms of it's a quick decision to fire guys after 0-3 starts. Do you think that like this is something that will continue to happen in college football now with NIL, with transfer portal being as active as it's been? Like, if you feel like you get your guy, especially in UCLA's case, where you go and spend some big money on Nico to be your quarterback and you haven't had results, like, do you think that this is a trend that may continue, or you see some early season firings if success doesn't come?
Yeah, I think that it will be, especially at I don't want to say like because a lot was made about the possibility of this happening with Billy Napier last year at Florida. But I think when you have like the bigger schools with the bigger names, the bigger coaches, the bigger contracts, and the bigger buyouts, you have to kind of toe that line between, all right, do we want to pay this buyout, or is it better to like, let's go with this coach and take that money that we would spend on the buyout and spend that in the portal instead, and then see how this goes. I think that when you get into that next tier of school, the next tier of coach, the next tier of buyout, then the math becomes a little bit easier, where now you actually want to make that move and make it early to try and save your team. Say, hey, you know what? Whoever your best players are at Virginia Tech, at UCLA, red shirt. You don't have to play the rest of this year. Don't go in the portal. Stay with us. We're going to pay you. We're going to take care of you. We're going to go and we're going to bring in another coach and try and build this thing moving forward. 5 years ago, 8 years ago, 10 years ago, these moves would not have happened right now in September. Like the fact that we've got 2 Power 5 coaches, Power 4 coaches fired September 16th, like, that's crazy. You would not have seen that. But I think because of the dynamic in today's game, yeah, you are going to see that. But again, I don't think it'll be at the highest level. I think it's going to be that next tier of coach, and certainly when you get into group of 5 as well.
I think it's interesting too, like on the flip side, if you see a coach that does maybe not get fired, and I'm going to use an instance where a coach wasn't fired, but basically said, we're not renewing your contract, was Charles Huff at Marshall last year. So they win the Sun Belt last season, and Charles Huff basically gets told, yeah, we're not going to bring you back, which is stunning because you win the conference. So Charles Huff leaves. He goes to Southern Miss. A mass exodus of transfer portal players out of Marshall. And so far this year, they have a win against an FCS opponent, but they lose to Missouri State last week. 2 weeks ago. They lose to Georgia the first week of the year, 45-7. And, it almost feels like if you're going to make the move, as you brought up, that next tier down, as in a Marshall, right? Or even a UCLA who has a pedigree but has been down over the last couple of seasons, maybe you do make it now to kind of, hedge your bet a little bit, recoup your losses, and then you have that money in the transfer portal, because I think the transfer portal elevates the floor, right? It's obviously, if you have Georgia money or Alabama money, it obviously allows you. In Ohio State, in last year's case, spending $45 million or whatever they did, then you're going to be able to bring in some significant players. But it elevates the floor for some of these Sun Belt, Conference USA type of teams, lower tier American teams. Like those types of teams now can compete at a smaller level, but they can elevate the floor a little bit by saying, hey, listen, I know we're not Georgia. I know we're not LSU. I know we're not, Michigan or Ohio State, but we can offer you a little bit more. And you can be a part, like not a part of the coaching decision, but know like the process as we go.
Yeah. And that's what it's fascinating, having worked in college football and we're talking decades ago now at this point, it was a much different landscape.
You're old.
That's a different world. But I think that especially at that level, at the group of 5 level, I think you almost have to operate the way that Boise has operated for a long time. And they've had some ups and downs over that stretch. But I look at even like the way that Toledo right now under Jason Candle is being built, where you see a lot of guys that go and they have success, and maybe NFL or Power Force teams come calling. Quinyon Mitchell had all kinds of offers going into his senior year. The defensive tackle that the Giants took in the third round last year had offers. They've got a safety there this year, McNeil, who had offers to go elsewhere in the portal, but they were able to stay. You take care of them from a money standpoint. You don't have to go crazy, but you take care of them. But it's more about like the relationships that were built in the recruiting process. The safety this year, McNeil. He had a concussion in his senior year that cost him a lot of games, and a lot of the bigger schools backed off. Toledo stayed loyal to him, so now he's repaying the favor. I know it was a similar kind of thing with Quinyon Mitchell when he was there. And I think that the relationships that are built are going to be super, super, super important for a lot of these teams that are trying to keep that talent. But look, the other part of it too, and it just kind of is what it is, right? I've talked with people at Temple about this as well, or about Temple in this way. It's like, oh, well, you go and you find this talent, and then you just become a breeding ground for the other schools. They come in, they poach. All right, well, if that's the case, you can look down at lower levels, and you can do the same thing to, University of Albany. Like, they get Jared Verse, who was this all-world pass rusher down at that level, goes to Florida State, carries that over. You can go find those players. But then there's also the cases where a 5-star kid at Alabama or at Georgia or wherever doesn't have success, and you go and you try and see if you can catch lightning in a bottle in that way too. So I think that teams are trying to navigate this the best they can, and there's a lot of ways to do it. We've seen lots of examples of it going both ways here in the early stages of the portal.
All right, so on the other side, we're going to take a quick break. On the other side, we'll get to our top 5, which is going to be our big deal segment of the day, which is brought to us by our friends over at Cherry Hill Kia. Our big deal, and the reason it's a big deal is because it's the first time Fran and I have some significant differences, and we'll talk about why, and we'll give our reasoning as to why. I know, Fran, you go more along the eye test of who you played and how you played them. My numbers come a little bit more from the stats and from how I perceive these teams in terms of how maybe the committees would think about them. But that'll be our big deal segment coming up on the other side. It is the All Nittany Lion podcast. We're brought to you by our friends over at Branded Bills. Use that code BBPHLY at the top of your screen for 15% off your first purchase. And of course, we are broadcasting live from the Xfinity mobile studios, and we'll be right back after this. All right, while we're here, let me tell you about our friends over at Cherry Hill Kia, because if you're looking for an incredible SUV, Cherry Hill Kia. If you're looking for an incredible Sportage, a Telluride, a Soul, a Seltos, you know where to go. It's Cherry Hill Kia and KiaofCherryHill.com, where you can shop 24/7 online. They have over 450 new Kias to choose from, and it is the hottest automotive brand in the country for a reason. 7 of their models received a 2025 Car and Driver Editor Choice Award, which is amazing considering the fact that there are over 450 models tested and only 20 models industry-wide received the award. Plus, you combine that with the best warranty in all of the automotive business, 10-year, 100,000-mile powertrain, 5-year, 60,000-mile bumper-to-bumper. You've got incredible offers that cannot be beat. Stop in today, tell them that we here at PHLY sent you, and you can receive $100 in restaurant.com gift cards just for taking a test drive or completing a trade-in appraisal. Listen, I know people buy Kias elsewhere. I just don't know why. Drive home in your new Kia today, just minutes from all bridges, or available online 24/7 at KiaofCherryHill.com.
We'll now hear from our friends over at Ace Hardware Home Services, because we all know the jingle. It's one of the best jingles in the jingle biz, right? Ace is the place with the helpful hardware, folks. Well, they are more than just that. They now have the outlet, or they have that ability to help you at home with whatever project you need. If you've got the outlet that you said you were going to fix last summer, if you've got, maybe there was a leaky faucet down in the laundry room, or if you had an electrical thing that needed to get taken care of, and you said, oh, I'm going to keep putting it off. I'm going to keep putting it off. Ace Hardware has someone that is going to be able to take care of you, because they are not just the helpful hardware folks. They are also the helpful home service and repair folks. From plumbing and electrical to heating and cooling, they've got the trusted pros to keep your home humming all year long. Ace Hardware Home Services, they're bringing helpful home, the helpful you love, from the store now to your front door, from Philly to the Jersey Shore. And again, look, it's starting to get a little bit colder. You want to make sure your heating system is good to go. Bring them out. Make sure now you're covered all through the winter. Get you through to the spring. Visit Ace Hardware Home Services online at acehardwarehomeservices.com to get you started on your next project.
All right, welcome back to the All Nittany Lion podcast, brought to you by our friends over at Branded Bills, Tyler Zulli and Fran Duffy, as we broadcast live from the Xfinity mobile studio. And it is time to get into our big deal segment of the day. And if you give me just 1 second, trying to scramble, because I realized I forgot to pay our bills, and should probably post this graphic here, because that's what they tell us to do, and that's how they pay us to do it. So as soon as we do that, I will get that for you. But of course, our big deal segment is brought to you by our friends over at Cherry Hill Kia. Again, KiaofCherryHill.com. Shop 24/7 online for all of the great models that Kia has to offer. All right, Fran, it's time to get into our big deal segment of the week, which is a big deal because we have differing opinions on our top five. So last week, our 1 and 2 were the same. Our 5 were the same. And it was just a switch of 3 and 4. You had LSU at 3. I had Penn State at 3, but the other had the other at 4. And you had Penn State at 4, and I had LSU at 4. So it really wasn't that big of a change. This week, a little bit of a difference. Now, we'll go through yours first, and then I'll tell you why mine is a little bit different second. But here is your list, and then you can talk through it as much as you'd like.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I stuck with the same 5 as the previous week. All 5 teams won. I don't think – look, Penn State winning over Villanova, that's not going to be a needle mover, but it's not going to be an eliminating factor for me either. Georgia taking care of business against Tennessee, one of the best games so far in the college football season. And I mentioned that LSU defense, man. I'm a big believer in Blake Baker and what they're doing there. To me, I feel good about this top 5. By the time we get to 2 weeks from now, obviously that things could change. If Penn State, that win or lose against Oregon, that will certainly have an impact here on what this top 5 looks like.
Yeah, I think that I have and I will say this, I have absolutely no issue with this top 5. I think it's a solid group. And I think if this were, last week, I probably, again, would have had a similar view to you. Now, I will say this, my 1 and my 2 are the same as you again this week. I have Ohio State at 1. I have Oregon at 2, and Oregon wins by 20 in their Big Ten opener. I also have Georgia at 5. And so 3 of our 5 are the same. But where we differ is I moved LSU down to 4. Well, I should say I kept LSU at 4. Penn State is not on my list this week. And I think the reason being is because there was a team that really has impressed me over the last couple of weeks. And it's with a quarterback that, Fran, I've said to you before, I'm not the biggest fan of this quarterback, but they've now beaten 2 ranked teams in the last 3 weeks, and I have to give credit where credit is due to Carson Beck and the Miami Hurricanes. And I'm going to put Miami at number 3 this week. They now have wins over Notre Dame in the first week of the year, a win over South Florida. And South Florida, by the way, got into the top 25 last week after their win against Florida. This wasn't just a win over South Florida. This was a beatdown. It was 49-12. I know Carson Beck threw 2 interceptions, but also threw for 300 yards. Mark Fletcher ran for well over 120 and 2 scores. The defense was electric. They held the South Florida run game to basically 40-some-odd yards on the ground. Their leading rusher went for 6 for 20, and the pass defense was just as good. I don't know how good Miami is going to be throughout the majority of the season, but as I said, I have to give credit where it's due because I was not super excited or super high on Carson Beck heading into the season, but they now have an opportunity to go up against the Florida team who, by the way, Fran, man, you want to talk about a schedule gauntlet. So they lose to South Florida. They now have to play Miami. They still have 6 ranked opponents in SEC play and Florida State at the end of the year. 7 of their final 9 games are against ranked opponents. You brought up Billy Napier earlier in the show. He may get fired. He may not. They may eat the money eventually and say it's time to move on. But the schedule is not doing him any favors, and I know DJ Lagway didn't play particularly well this past week, but that schedule might be the most difficult college football schedule I've seen in a long time.
Yeah, I mean, you look at Florida's slate. I was looking at Oklahoma's too. Again, it's like teams in the SEC, teams in the Big Ten. Like, if you draw the wrong card, like you've got a really tough slate, and so both of those teams, I think, are going to be feeling it here in the coming months. But I think when you look at Miami and what they've done, I mean, the record certainly speaks for themselves. I mean, being able to take care of South Florida after what USF did to both Boise and to the Gators, to me, like I'm not a betting guy, but if you going into this, I was like, yeah. USF's they're not sneaking up on Miami at this point. So
Sure.
I think that to me, like I expected the Hurricanes to come out and play well. I have a lot of respect for that coaching staff down there, especially on the offensive side of the ball. I know it's a new defensive coordinator as well, new defensive system. But I think when you look at Beck, kind of a forgotten man. Like, I still had a relatively high grade on him as a guy that could be like a low end starter, high end backup in the NFL coming into the season. I know it wasn't great for him last year at Georgia, but I think that this is a guy that still has like NFL ability. And he's had a good start to the year. I'm excited to see what he can do for this team down the stretch as some of these games start to become more and more high profile. But I think he's done a solid job. I have no qualms with you putting them up at number 3. I still would probably, like, if it was a head-to-head, I think I would take LSU over Miami, but I think this would be that would certainly be a fun potential playoff matchup here once we get into the winter.
It's funny. I think I tend to agree with that statement there. If these two teams met on a neutral site, I think LSU would win the football game. And I think that's kind of my differentiator in how I'm doing these rankings at the current moment. And it's not an indicator of how I feel the college football playoff should be ranked or anything like that. It's an indicator of right this moment who I feel is playing some of the best football. And that's why I think Miami being above LSU, only because of the fact, and this may be a little bit hypocritical because I think their defense has been awesome, but offensively, 20 points against Florida, 23 against Louisiana Tech, 17 against Clemson. Now, playing against Clemson defense to get out of that game with a win is important enough. I know you're a big Garrett Nussmeier guy. I am as well. And I think there's some signs from him that have been really, really encouraging. But, it is fair to say they've scored 60 points in 3 games. So I wonder, as they get into some more SEC play, and again, they've played Clemson's defense and come out on top. As they get into SEC play, they still have Ole Miss on the road, Vandy on the road, Texas A&M at home, Bama on the road, Oklahoma on the road to end the season. That's a difficult schedule in and of itself. Can that offense score enough points on a weekly basis to feel really good about how good the defense has played so far?
Yeah, last year they had more eruption spots where you saw them go like 35, 40, 45 points. And, as they get into the meat of this SEC schedule and you take on some of these defenses that can be a little bit more leaky. I mean, we'll see if they're able to do that. I do think this Florida defense does have some bite to it. They were able to get Caleb Banks back healthy this week. They've got Tyreek Sapp up front. They've got some dogs on the back end as well. So I think that was still a pretty staunch test there for Nussmeier and that LSU passing game that they're also working in like new weapons, much like Drew Aller. We've talked about that from Penn State side. Nussmeier was doing something similar with a brand new offensive line down there as well. 4/5 of their offensive line got drafted this past spring. So I think when you're looking at what LSU could look like, I think offensively you're hoping certainly their fans are hoping that the arrow is pointing up. I've got a lot of faith in that defense, man. That defense is gonna be a lot of fun.
So then the last two questions, I think Georgia, for both of us sitting at 5, it almost feels like Georgia's just kind of under the radar this year compared to Georgia teams in the past, which obviously they're a top 10 ranked team. Yeah. We both have them sitting at number 5. Like, we are giving them the respect, but it's not, Georgia's bona fide number 1, Georgia's consensus number 1. Is that the type of team that I think maybe could rally around, like, they've had pedigree. They have an incredible amount of skill on their roster. But is that the type of team that goes, hey, bulletin board material, whatever works for us, let's continue to play this fly under the radar, and then all of a sudden we're going to be 12-1 and head into the college football playoff ready to go? Like, it feels like this might be that year for Georgia, which is strange to say.
Yeah, I think that, it's tough because a lot of their best players, it's on defense especially, they're not like national, like household names, right? Like
Sure.
I like CJ Allen. I think he's a good player. I don't know that he is like first round pick, Quay Walker, like that kind of player, right? They don't have a Jalen Carter up front. Like Christian Miller's a nice player. I don't think he's Jalen Carter. I don't know if he's going to go as high as Jordan Davis went, right? So you go through and you go down the list and you're like, all right, they don't have like that depth of quality, like blue chip proven talent. And then offensively, like Stetson Bennett was a great college quarterback. I don't know that Gunnar Stockton is there yet. Now, he made big strides for me, like in this game. Like he showed, like he can cut it loose. He can go toe to toe with a great passing game and kind of go strike for strike. And so I think that in this one, kind of, he gave me some faith there in that game against Tennessee. I love the fact that they were able to kind of fire back after going down. Was it 21-0, 24-0? In that game and come back and win in overtime. I think that speaks a lot to that program, and we know what to expect from Kirby Smart. And that culture that he's built down there in Athens. So I do think that this is a team that is going to be in the mix. Do I think that they've got what it takes to be like a real like national title team? I don't know that team has enough offensive firepower to get there. We saw some flashes from Zachariah Branch and some of those guys. They've got talent. I think I'm still waiting to see it with Stockton, but right now I do think that their resume puts them at number 5.
Then the last team I want to bring up to you, we talked about their quarterback just very briefly earlier in the show. How good is Georgia Tech?
There was a stat. I don't have it in front of me, but it's like what their record has been against ranked opponents under Brent Pry, and
sure.
They are like the giant slayer, right? Like they've got that ability to beat up the bully on the block. It started in the week 0 last year against Florida State. It was just what they've been able to do consistently over the last couple of years, and they take down Clemson this past week. It's a tough physical football team. I would expect that they're probably going to be in the mix for the ACC title, but it's again like are they going to be able to outlast everybody on that schedule? And are they going to make some noise when they get into the playoff? Like that might be could it be like an Indiana type of situation last year, where all right, you go up against a bigger, more talented team? Are they able to outlast everybody? That I think I'm waiting to see if I feel good about that prospect, but. It's a good team. It's a physical team, and they're going to give you everything when you line up against them on a Saturday.
Oh, we got a fun week of college football ahead and pro football ahead for that matter. But the one thing is you don't have any Penn State football to watch this weekend. So you got a big noon kickoff between 17 and 16, Texas Tech and Utah. You got the what used to be the Civil War against Oregon and Oregon State. Obviously not the same bite to it since they're not in the same conference anymore. But there is still in-state, rivalry to be had, and I think there's still a lot of fun in those games. 22-11, Auburn and Ole Miss Oklahoma, gets set to play South Carolina and Missouri. I know South Carolina not currently ranked, but could be a good game there. Then you've got Illinois and Indiana as the ranked game in the Big Ten this week, number 9 versus number 19. So no Penn State football this week, but still quite a few good games around the college football landscape. Yeah,
it's gonna be a fun one, and it's also like you had the great week 1 slate, and then week 2 everyone was down. It's like, it's not as good of a slate as last week, obviously, and then it turned out great games. Like this college football season has been awesome. I would expect that to continue here this week. There's gonna be a lot of fun action, and even like the Friday night games have been entertaining. Like it's been a great start. So I'm excited to take in the action here this week.
Well, that's our big deal segment, which is brought to you by our friends over at Cherry Hill Kia. Visit KiaofCherryHill.com to shop 24/7 on all 450 models. Fran, another hour has flown by, and we'll kind of patiently wait. We'll regroup next week. We'll talk more X's and O's, more detail about this game, and this is a rematch, I should say, of these two teams playing in the Big Ten championship. Some may say that Penn State losing that game was the best thing that could have happened to them last year in terms of how the seeding fell, but I think both of these teams primed for another big year, and I'm excited to dive into the meat of this game next week with you as we get set for September 27th, the whiteout against the Oregon Ducks.
No question, man. I'm excited. I'm going to be going through that Oregon State film on Sunday morning. I've already watched a handful of those guys in preparation for this season, but Dante Moore's been dealing, so I'm excited to dig through more of the Ducks and get you ready for next weekend.
All right, everybody, thanks so much for hanging out with us this afternoon and each and every Tuesday at 5 o'clock here on the All Nittany Lion podcast. We'll be back next week, as we said, to dive into that film. We'll talk more about the Oregon Ducks. We'll talk about Oregon and Oregon State and the first Big Ten game of the season for the Penn State Nittany Lions. For Fran Duffy, I'm Tyler Zulli saying thank you so much for hanging out with us. Thanks so much for watching. We'll be back next Tuesday at 5 at this very time to get into that tape. We are brought to you by our friends over at Branded Bills. Use the promo code BBPHLY for 15% off of your first purchase. And as always, we are broadcasting live from the Xfinity mobile studios. Until next time, we will talk to you right here on the All Nittany Lion podcast. Have a good one.
We all silly like the